Good evening. Chief Rabbi, Leonie's family, Howard, Ben and Ruth, rabbis and rebbitzins, US trustees, colleagues and friends. My name is Jo Groves. I'm the Chief Executive of the United Synagogue, and it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you all tonight to tonight's very special evening in honor of our friend, colleague and mentor, Leonie Lewis. The concept of tonight's event, an evening to learn together in Leonie's memory, was the idea of United Synagogue trustees Claire Lima and Jackie Zinkin. Our hope is not only that it will allow us to remember Leonie, who we miss so much, but also that it will enable us to grow and leave with new ideas to put into practice. We think that Leonie would have approved of this intention. It's also appropriate that this evening is held during National Volunteers Week for Leonie, the champion of volunteering. Leonie encapsulated every aspect of the United Synagogue, not least because somehow she managed to fill almost every role within the organisation during her life. Community lay leader, US professional, volunteer, trustee, member, director, vice president. There are few people who could claim to have had such a broad understanding of our charity, its opportunities, the challenges, the politics, but mostly the potential. In preparation for this evening, I have been talking about Leonie with colleagues at the US, and it turns out, perhaps not surprisingly, that many of the most talented members of staff were tapped up by Leonie. She spotted good people, and she brought them in. And then once they were in, she didn't leave them to get on with it. She stayed available to them, offering advice, encouragement, and occasionally rather vigorous nudges in the right direction. She was a mentor to so many. Approximately 8 years ago, as I was considering applying for a role at the United Synagogue, it was Leonie I called to discuss whether it was the right move, to understand whether the US was the right space for me. I can actually remember the call very vividly. Leonie was realistic but positive and painted a picture of what I could achieve in the role, and because of that, I made the leap. When last year the role of chief executive opened up, and I was trying to determine the right path for me and for the US, there was one person I really wanted to call, and I have to tell you that I really missed her advice at that time, and I hope that she would have approved of my decision. This evening, we are honoured to be joined by the Chief Rabbis, Sir Ephraim Mervis. This is testament to the significant and transformational contribution Leonie made, both within the Jewish and the wider community. Chief Rabbi, we are grateful for your leadership, your very close engagement with our communities, and your presence this evening, and I am delighted to invite you to speak.
Thank you very much, Joe. Rabbis and Rebbitzins, President, Trustees, and CEO of the United Synagogue, Dr. Erica Brown, members of the Lewis family, ladies and gentlemen. Our event this evening takes place between the readings of two parshiot, Naso, which we read last Shabbat, and Baha'alotecha, which we shall be reading this coming Shabbat. Naso commences with a statement of appreciation of the value of every single person. Nasa et Rosh, it's a mitzvah to take a census, to count the nation, but instead of saying count people, the Torah says Nasa et Rosh, raise their heads, elevate them. Don't allow any person to become a mere statistic, a number, rather appreciate the value of every single soul. This is something which Leonie Lewis, Zichrono Livracha, inspired us all to do, to appreciate that every single person is precious. All of our members and everybody outside our membership, within our communities, within Am Yisrael, and well beyond the Jewish people. And her contribution was multifaceted in so many different areas. She made her mark, and as a result, she is continuously missed. I find it quite extraordinary. It even happened today this afternoon when I had a meeting, and Leonie's name came up. It happens so often. We miss Leonie. If only she was here. We miss her input. What would she have said? And indeed, that's because in her own quiet but determined way, she made an extraordinary contribution, and her legacy is immense. But it's not just good enough for every single person to know that they count. We would like everybody to do something with their ability to make their presence felt, and for everybody, like Leonie, to have a great impact. And that's where we come to the commencement of next week's Parashat Baha'alotecha. It's a mitzvah to kindle the lights, but instead of telling Aharon and his children, the Kohanim, Baha'adlikecha, when you kindle, instead the Torah says, Baha'alotecha, when you raise the lights. And here Hashem wants us to know, just like light, which has the potential to bring inspiration into people's lives, so too every human being has that capacity. And it must be a case of Baha'alotecha. Let's raise ourselves. Let's guarantee that our contribution will be of the highest possible quality and standard. And in turn, let us inspire others to bring light into the world in their own way. And Parashat Baha'alotecha provides us with inspiration as to how we can do this through our connection with our Torah, through Talmud Torah, and through carrying out Torah values in our life. Says the parasha, Va'aron Brit Hashem nosea lifnehem. The Ark of the Covenant of Hashem would always travel before the people on our journeys through the wilderness. Now, try and imagine what it looked like. The Ark was being carried, and the people accompanied it. The picture one would have in one's mind is people surrounding the Ark, but that's not the case. In Sefer Yoshua Perik Gimel, we are told that whenever the Ark went before the people, it went 2,000 cubits in front of the nation. That's about half a mile. So there were a few who are carrying it, and then an enormous gap, and then the nation spread very widely, half a mile behind the Ark. What kind of honor was this that we were giving to the Ark of the Covenant? And the explanation, I believe, must be as follows. If everybody would have crowded around the Ark in order to give it honor, very few would have been able to see it. And the vast majority of the nation would have had to rely on the account, the testimony of those few who saw it, who experienced it, so that they could have an idea of what the Ark was about. That's not how we went about things. Instead, the Ark went ahead. There was an enormous gap in the desert, nothing in between, so that every single member of the nation could see that Ark and have their own personal connection with it, so that they wouldn't have to rely on the witness statements of others. It's a case of Aten chelkeinu b'toratecha, an opportunity for every single person to establish their chelek, their portion within Torah, and to have their own special and precious experiences. But it wasn't important only to have a one-off experience of this nature. Parashat Baha'alotecha tells us about Aaron, that he would kindle the lights of the menorah. Says the Torah, Vaya'as Kain Aharon. Hashem told him what to do, and Aaron listened to Hashem. Why is it necessary for the Torah to tell us, Vaya'as Kain Aharon? Would there ever been a havamin, a possibility of a thought in his mind that he wouldn't have listened to what Hashem said? Explains Rashi, Melamed Shelo Shina. From here we learn that Aaron never changed. And that strengthens our question. How could it have been possible for him to have a thought on such a simple issue to change the instructions of Hashem? So the Sfat Emet explains beautifully. He says that here, Lo Shina, he didn't change, does not relate to changing the laws or the customs or the procedure. Rather, it means Lo Shina, Aaron himself never changed in terms of how he related to his task. On the very first occasion when he kindled the lights of the menorah, there was a sense of novelty. It was an extraordinary experience. And that same sense of passion and enthusiasm never left him. Lo shina, when he kindled the lights on the 10th time, the 100th time, the 1,000th time, it was as if it was his very first occasion. So from Parashat Ba'alotecha we learn how important it is for every one of us to have that connection with Torah and for it to continue throughout our lives. Leonie, as has been mentioned, was so instrumental in so many different organizations and capacities, and particularly within the United Synagogue, to inspire. And I personally, everybody's got their own personal connection to Leonie and how she gave us, at a personal level, inspiration. And I'll never forget how she wanted to inspire our rabbis to guarantee that every single one of our members and those who were not yet our members would have their own personal connection with the Torah. But most importantly of all, to guarantee that the passion and enthusiasm would always be there. Always remember the honeycomb folder that she wrote and presented to us, a guide to programming to guarantee that our ideas would always be fresh, that we would continue to be creative, and to roll out exciting programs of activity within our communities to guarantee that the passion would always be there. And in an age of apathy, that's so crucially important for us. And Leonie as well championed the value of Talmud Torah, studying Torah, the centrality of education to guarantee the continuity of our people. And I think, Joe, you're absolutely right. Leonie would have approved of this event tonight to ensure that we have a world-renowned scholar, Dr. Erica Brown, present in our midst to strengthen our own personal connection with Torah and to ensure that that connection will always be an exciting one, always have a sense of novelty, always bring to it the privilege we have to be engaged with Torah and to discover its continuous relevance in our lives. So therefore, let us this evening enjoy the presentation that will be given. It certainly lives up to the aspirations that Leonie has for all of us and through us within all of our communities and beyond. And let us, like Leonie, feel passion for our communities, guarantee that others too are connected, and let us fulfill the Ba'alotecha to ensure that it's not just us who strive to bring light into this world, but may we, like Leonie, inspire others to carry that torch as well, so that through volunteering our time and our talent and our knowledge to those around us, we will hopefully bring light to this world and make it indeed into a better place. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. And like you, I'm now looking forward with incredible anticipation to sitting at the feet of a true master of Torah knowledge. Thank you.
Many thanks, Chief Rabbi, for your words of Torah and also for that call to action. Just a few words of introduction from me ahead of Erica's talk. Just to return to Leonie for a few minutes. Earlier today, I was talking to a colleague, so I think he's in the room somewhere, and we were wondering aloud, if we were to erect a statue in 305 in head office to Leonie, what would it look like? Now, let me reassure you, that is not our intention, but a thought experiment. So we tried to imagine, what would the posture be? What dynamic pose could we possibly have the statue of Leonie kind of standing in, and we couldn't make it work, because the fact is that Leonie never stood still. She was full of energy, enthusiasm and vitality. But there was something crucial that I learned from working with her, and that is that underneath all of that fizz and vigour, there was direction and there was strategy. She knew where she was going. There was most certainly a master strategic plan. And so to our keynote speaker, Dr. Erica Brown, who this morning reminded me everything is about strategy. She is also the person who introduced me some years ago to the concept of authentic leadership, a model to which Leonie most certainly subscribed. Erica is the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University and the founding director of the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. She's written numerous books on Tanakh, on leadership and spirituality. Her latest book is on Kohelet and is a world-renowned Jewish speaker. It gives me enormous pleasure to invite her to deliver a lecture in Leonie's memory, entitled The Long Arc of Service.
We're going to do this the American way. I feel that in the past weeks, I have lost a friend I never had. I have heard all kinds of people share memories of Leonie with me, the way she mentored them, the way she pushed them, the way she suggested, her honesty and candor when it was important, her compliments and her encouragement when it was necessary. And I wanted to say something specifically to you, Howard. We had a little interchange today, and I got to meet you and your daughter via email. I didn't say this to you. I had only one Leonie in my life. She was one of my closest friends growing up in Deal, New Jersey, and that is until today. I feel that she is somehow a hovering presence. This morning I had the gift of working and learning from the rabbis and rebbitzins, many of them from the United Synagogue communities. And Rabbi Michael Leitner, who's here this evening, shared something that Rabbi Sachs wrote in 2000 in the tablet. And he was so kind, and he made me a photocopy, and he gave it to me, and I was so anxious to read it. And I came across the close of this piece, which I think perhaps in some way is emblematic of Leonie's gifts. He says in this essay on humility, "We know when we have been in the presence of someone in whom the divine presence breathes. We feel affirmed, enlarged, and with good reason. For we have met someone who, not taking himself or herself seriously at all, has shown us what it is to take with utmost seriously that which is not I." And I love this expression, the idea that we're in the presence of someone in whom the divine presence breathes. So tonight I want to be not only in Leonie's presence, but I want to be in the presence of Moshe Rabbeinu. I want to take you to Har Niveau, to Mount Niveau with me. We up for a little travel tonight? And then we'll travel backwards, because we're going to talk about the passing of Moshe and the legacy that Moshe left. And I say that with gratitude to all of those in this room who've taken the legacy of Jewish service and continuity seriously. Chief among them, our chief this evening. Thank you, Chief Rabbi. Thank you, Lady Elaine, for being here. Joanna Ben-Arosh is my partner at the Trust. Joe Gross, Rabbi Nikki Liss, all those who were instrumental in me having a fabulous week and reuniting my husband with chocolate digestives and fish balls. It's been a wonderful trip down memory lane, made better by the presence of friends. And I want to thank Joe and Richard, our dear friends who've hosted us this week. So you have a picture, you have a handout, and you have a beautiful painting. This painting was done by an Australian artist, Robert Hawke Dowling, who actually became a citizen of the UK. And so I thought that that was a nice little fun fact for us this evening. And I want us to look carefully at what the artist has tried to depict of Moshe from Deuteronomy, from Devarim Lamed Daled, Deuteronomy 34. This is Moshe in his last breath, with his last breaths, taking an aerial view of the land that he will never see. Many people regard the fact that Moshe never crossed the Yarden, the Jordan River, as the great tragedy of Moshe's life. I hope this evening we'll see a slightly different perspective. That perhaps Moshe was given the ultimate gift of any leader, the capacity to look back and see who he's brought with him, or her, and the aerial view of what the future will look like, the beauty of it, the length and breadth of it. And I want to open with a thought from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, my own teacher and Driving down Victoria Road and passing the old Jews College brought back all kinds of memories of being in his wonderful classroom. In Judaism, he writes, to lead is to serve. Those who serve do not lift themselves high, they lift other people high. Amplifying the words of Rabbi Mervis about Bahalotcha. And I want to think with you about a time when you saw a situation from a distance and it looked a little bit different than when you looked at it up close. To share a leadership concept from Dan and Chip Heath's book, they've written many books, probably their most famous is Made to Stick, about marketing ideas. This is their book about change. It's called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And they have a concept called a destination postcard. A destination postcard is a picture of what things look like when they work. You know when you get a postcard and it says, wish you were here, but they don't really mean it because they took a vacation often to get away. So wish you were here, and it's a picture, really they're envy cards, right? We miss you so much, love from Thailand, wherever the destination is. One of the things that they believe, if you want to make serious change, you have to give people a picture of what that change is going to look like. And we, unfortunately, often are hardwired for criticism and not hardwired for visualizing a successful future. So we find fault with the things that are around us that aren't working, with the institutions that are less than, with people, leaders we feel are mediocre, could be better, could have said this or could have done this. And the only cure for that is really to show people an optimistic lens of the future. In fact, in an organization in Canada, they had a sort of vision of what they could do in a particular city from a Jewish point of view, and that involved a change of buildings, a change of organization, a strengthening of certain existing organizations, a merging of other organizations. This was many years ago. And so they created actually a model, a physical model, and a room where that model was placed, and signage to help people understand, if we get this right, this is what it's going to look like. So now we're going to think about the destination postcard that Moshe created and the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God created for him, so that he could have a look at what it was that he did all of the work for. We don't always get that gift. We don't always get that privilege, but every once in a while. So if you will look with me, here he says, destination postcards, the Heath brothers, pictures of a future that hard work can make possible, can be incredibly inspiring. Show us what this looks like if it works, if it's true. So we actually have a destination postcard. It took a little while to get that destination postcard. We're in Devarim Chet. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Ki Hashem Elokecha meviecha el eretz tova, eretz nachalei mayim, ayonot v'tomot yotzim b'bika u'bahar. Your God is taking you to a good land, a land that's filled with water, with springs, right? Things that are water that's coming out, gushing from everywhere. Now, why would that have been a fabulous destination postcard for the Israelites in the desert? In the desert. In the desert. Because what did they want? They wanted water. They wanted the sense that wherever they were going, the arid dryness of the world that they had occupied for 40 years was coming to an end. So what's the first promise you make in your destination postcard? Ladies and gentlemen, there'll be water. There'll be so much water you simply cannot believe. It will be coming from everywhere. That's addressing a need that people have and giving them the destination postcard of what this one day will look like. Eretz chita u'sorah v'gefen u'teina v'rimon eretz zayit shemen u'dvash. And now there's a promise of the 7 species, very specific grouping of trees and grain that would make them happy to get to the land of Israel, and very different from the set of fruits and vegetables that they wanted to cultivate while they were in the middle of the desert from chapter Yud Aleph. Anyone remember what were the things they pined for in Egypt? Cucumbers, watermelon. These are high water content foods. What else? Fish, also associated with water. They were not fish balls. No, they weren't. I mean, I've seen commentaries, medieval commentaries, that point that out, but what else? They wanted, so here's the irony. They wanted meat. In fact, they complained to Moshe, you can't give us meat. But then they list the vegetables and the fish that they had in Mitzrayim, b'chinam, for free. There's a machloket, an argument in the Talmud, in Tractate Yoma, about what it was that they actually wanted. Were they complaining indeed about the food and the way that they got the food, the easy access to food, which would have been denied them in the wilderness? It was very hard to access food. Or perhaps the chaste, monotonous landscape was really getting under their skin. And what they wanted were pungent foods, because no one's mentioned the garlic and the onions, right? They wanted not only water-rich content foods, they wanted pungent foods. They wanted food that spiced things up. And the fish, in one opinion in the Talmud, was an erotic image. They were tired of the chasteness of the midbar, of the desert. They wanted something that was exciting. The Rashbam, Rav Shmuel ben Meir, the grandson of Rashi, talks about when our gullets were dry, because their perception was that the manna, the man, was this constantly drying food. We have a midrashic view that what they ate tasted like anything that they wanted. But that's not actually indicated in the text itself. And so we don't really know what it is that they had. But there's food that was associated with the land of Egypt. There was the transitional food of the manna, which stopped in the 5th chapter of the book of Joshua because we had gotten there. There was no transition anymore. And then there was the destination postcard food. Now, if you look carefully at that chapter, at 11, where Moses has an absolute breakdown, and in fact he says, they want me to be a nursing mother. The image that he creates is one of milk as opposed to meat. They want total dependence. They want me to carry them everywhere. I cannot do that as a leader. I cannot provide. I am inadequate. If this is what you meant, God, I'm not the person for the job. And this is not the first time that Moshe has said that to God. So here's Moshe, and he understands when they talk about root vegetables, that an onion you take up from the ground, and that's all. That's the yield for the year. That's it. That these are people who want to be rooted, and he says the destination postcard is not a root vegetable. It is a tree with very deep roots that can access water, the water that you need to grow the fruit that you need. When I went to Note Kudumim, the Biblical Gardens of Israel, this is my second push for the Biblical Gardens of Israel this week. How many of you, by a show of hands, have been there? This is not bad. It's not bad, actually. It could be better. I'm not lying. I think there's a U.S. trip, perhaps, to the Biblical Gardens of Israel in your future, Joe. In the Biblical Gardens of Israel, they tried to explain, at least their botanical explanation, of why it was that we're not allowed to pick fruit from trees for 3 years. We're only allowed to enjoy it in the 4th year. Because if a tree exerts too much energy producing fruit, it will not make deep enough roots to sustain it for the long haul. What do we want in the midbar? We could have been fooled by images of temporary relief. But the destination postcard that Moshe presents is one of longevity and sustenance. Stay in the long haul. If you stay here a little longer, I'm going to take you to a place of abundance where you will be deeply rooted. Because ultimately the food was really a metaphor and symbol for what they really wanted, which is to be settled in a place in which they were nurtured. And notice that the fruits that we associate with the land of Israel were sweet, where the foods that we associated with Egypt were bitter. And we encapsulate that bitterness every Passover, every Pesach, when the foods at our table, the maror, the salt water, in some way are supposed to remind us of that bitterness. And yet what we're supposed to feel is that the land of Israel is associated with sweetness. One more verse. Eretz asher lo miskenut tochal ba lechem, lo techsar kolba, Eretz asher avaneha barzel u'mahareha tachzov nechoshet. So here's the image that he says, this has been a place of rabid desire. You want and you want and you want, and when you don't get it, you complain and you complain and you complain. But you're going to go to a place which will provide you with everything. Now, it's interesting to me, it's one of the questions I haven't resolved, so I'm always interested in a good answer to this. Why Moshe did not say this earlier in the game? Give the destination postcard, Exodus 16, right? Part the waters and say, look, guys, this is where we're going. Say it early and then say it again and say it again. But Moshe saves this till the book of Deuteronomy, his farewell address, to give people that extra little push to get to the end. Because sometimes it's hard to see the end. And I say that because I'm going to leave the text of Devarim for a few minutes. We are not quite at the end of what I believe will be a historic inflection point for the Jewish people. We are not completely finished with COVID. We still have the word COVID. People are still, a minority of people, but people are still masked. They still get COVID. And our organizations are still reeling from COVID. The losses have been immense. I spoke a little bit with the rabbis and rebbes about this morning, because you look at the pews and you see there are empty spaces where there were people. And some people are coming back, and some synagogues are thriving, but all of our institutions in some way are suffering. And we've withdrawn. And whether that's social, whether it's taken a cost, some kind of psychic cost on our spiritual lives, we have been hesitant to come back. We are still in that wilderness. We are waiting for some kind of destination postcard of what the post-COVID Jewish world will look like. And we're asking our leaders, and sometimes not asking ourselves, how am I contributing to this? How can I help rebuild? How can I volunteer? How can I contribute? And I imagine that would have been a question that Leonie would have spent a lot of time thinking about. So let's go back. Let's go back to Moshe. Moshe now, we get to the end of Devarim. We're in the middle of page 2 in your handout. V'al Moshe ma'arvot Moav al har Navo Rosh HaPiska Asher al Pnei Yericho. Now you know what Yericho looks like. I imagine many of you have seen it. It's a beautiful oasis in the desert. God takes Moshe up a mount. This is not the first time he's been up a mountain. And it's not the first time he's been up a mountain alone. But it will be the last time he will be up a mountain. And he will not come down. At least not on his own. Moshe is given V'yarehu Hashem et kol haaretz asher et Hagilad Adan. He's given the whole span of the land of Israel to see. Vet kol Naphtali vet Eretz Ephraim u'Menashe vet kol Eretz Yehuda ad Hayam ha'acharon. Look at Moshe. Could you imagine taking it in the eyes? Everything. This is what we dreamed about. This is what we talked about. I had the great, great privilege in 2006 of being with 74 Ethiopian Jews on the way to the land of Israel. I don't even have words to describe it. When I finished the trip, people said to me, Erica, how was your trip? And I said, it was life-altering. And they said, in what way? And I said, I just don't know yet. And it was clear to me that I could not have not been transformed by this experience. But I actually, it was very, very biblical. In the embassy, in the Israeli embassy in Addis Ababa, there's more than a typical embassy. There's a room, and in that room, there's a refrigerator and a stove, and there's basic appliances that Ethiopian Jews and Ethiopians who live in villages, and we went to Gondar, we saw some of those villages, they have never used any of those appliances. They were taking a 4-hour flight across hundreds of years of development that they had not experienced. And in fact, one of the most beautiful moments was that the people on our trip had the opportunity to give children clothing, festive clothing for the journey. I didn't want to say that no Israeli children wear those clothes, but anyway, it was a beautiful moment, and gave them shoes for the first time. Many children did not know how to tie shoes. They did not know how to tie shoes. So it was, and at night, the children were dressed and the families were dressed. We went out in the middle of the night in the streets of Addis Ababa to the airport, and thousands of people joined us and were singing Am Yisrael Chai. Where do you see something like that? of people who had a destination postcard. Because in the Ethiopian Jewish community, there was always this image of what the land of Israel is. And I have a regret that I'm going to share with you uncomfortably. When we landed in Ben Gurion today, you know the old days, remember the old days when we landed on the tarmac? Remember the bus, and the bus, you waited for the bus, and it was boiling hot, and the tarmac was hot. So anyway, we don't do that anymore in Ben Gurion Airport. But when flights with Ethiopians come to Israel, they still do that because it's very, very important for the community to kiss the ground. That is a very important thing. They come, they get off and they kiss the ground several times. Now, I was so awed by this moment that I found myself taking photos when what I should have done is kiss the ground as well. It's no less significant to me. But the sense of being with them in this moment, it really had that biblical feel, perhaps of Moshe coming to the land. So let's look. Moshe gets this amazing view. He said, Et ha-negev, et ha-kikar, he sees everything. And Zot haaretz, this is what God says to him. This is the land, asher nishbati la'Avraham, li'Yitzchak, u'li'Yakov. Le'mor le'zarecha et nena. I have given you this land. This is the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it will be given to your seed. Hari'itecha beinecha, you will be able to see this, but you will not be able to cross over into it. Now again, there's tragedy in those words, but there's something else in those words. You know, there's always a moment in leadership when there's one more project we're not going to do. There's one more thing that we really wanted to do before we retired. There was something we've been meaning to do in our families, we just didn't get to it. It happens. These things happen. But what Moshe hears from God is, I promised this land to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And you, Moshe, brought everyone back here. Could you have a bigger accomplishment in your life than this? Unifocused, this is what you set out to do, and you did it. You know, in leadership, one of the things that I often discuss with people I work with is the conclusion of a project. And you know how leaders are. You finish a project, and then a few minutes later go, okay, what's next? We don't necessarily celebrate. We don't say kudos to the team because we're already working on something else, because when you're working in the world of volunteering and tikkun olam, there's always something else to do. And I think here, God thoughtfully, tenderly says to Moshe, just look at it. Just look at the beauty and the grandeur. This is the destination postcard. You dreamed of this. You fought for this from your earliest days, and now we are here. And maybe, it's a good time to go. There will always be work to do, but if you have done this right, Moshe, I will give this to your seed. You will have populated this community with other leaders to carry on the legacy. I want to go back even further. I want to go back to the time we meet Moshe. So if you look at page 3 with me. And before I actually look at the text, I want to look at something that Ron Chafetz and Marty Linsky write in their article, Survival Guide for Leaders from the Harvard Business Review. It's on the top of page 3. Please follow along with me. Leadership is an improvisational art. You may be guided by an overarching vision, clear values, and a strategic plan, but what you actually do from moment to moment cannot be scripted. They wrote this years before COVID. You must respond as events unfold. To use our metaphor, you have to move back and forth from the balcony to the dance floor, over and over again, throughout the days, weeks, months, and years. The dance floor for them was the place where activity happens, where there's the hustle and the bustle and the noise. And the balcony is where you, and conveniently I've planned a balcony here, and the balcony is where you look down at what's going on, and you evaluate and you assess and you think about. And the dance floor can be a very reactive place. The balcony tends to be a very strategic place. And for them, if you want to be good at leadership, you have to be reactive, strategic. Reactive, strategic. You're on the dance floor, but then you have to move up and get the view. But let's continue in their thinking. But taking a balcony perspective is extremely tough to do when you're fiercely engaged down below. being pushed and pulled by the events and people around you, and doing some pushing and pulling of your own. Even if you're able to break away, the practice of stepping back and seeing the big picture is complicated by several factors. For example, when you get some distance, you still must accurately interpret what you see and hear. So there's a push and pull at the dance floor, and sometimes it's so hard to be reflective. Moshe spent 40 years with the push and the pull, and it was a pretty sandy dance floor. Everyone had needs, everyone had complaints, everyone weighed Moshe down. And there were times where Moshe dragged himself, could not find the spirit to continue. He articulated to God, and God gave him allies and partners. But even then, it was not without lots of tears. And so, by giving Moshe a chance to reflect from on high and look back and look forward and understand the promise that he kept, suddenly the push and pull looks a little bit different from up on high. So let's go back to Moshe's very beginning. V'elech ish mi beit Levi v'yikach et bat Levi. A man from a Levite family took as a wife a daughter of a Levite. Now this is very unusual information. Usually in Tanakh, when we introduce a person, we're going to give them a name and often their genealogical background. Here we only have the tribal affiliation. We don't have the names. In fact, it's an oddity of this chapter that many commentaries point out, is that we don't get names. In fact, Moshe's name only appears to us much later in the chapter. So we don't have the name of Moshe's parents. We will meet his sister. We don't have the name of the sister. Bat Paro will be helpful in this story to Moshe's survival, and we don't get her name either. We will learn these names later. V'tahar isha v'teled ben v'tereh et oto kitov, kitovhu v'yitzmenehu shlosha yirachim. So the woman conceived, she had a child, a son, and she saw him kitovhu, he was good, and she hid him away for 3 months because, of course, this was right after Pharaoh's decree. Now, if you have a male child right after Pharaoh's decree that all male children will be thrown into the Nile, what are the 2 words you say as a mother? Oy vey. The words probably that would come to mind would not be kitov. It was good. Rashbam, we mentioned him a little earlier, without really any commentary, draws us to an earlier chapter in Genesis 1 where we heard kitov several times. God said kitov. And then tov ma'od, it was very good, upon the creation of different facets of the universe. So Rashbam doesn't say anything, but in somehow directing our attention back to Genesis 1, he understands that what this woman Yocheved did, this mother did, was she was able to see the good at a time of terrible grief. She was able to see a situation which looked one way to everyone else, but looked different to her, looked in some way hopeful. And in doing so, she in some way activated the divine presence. She acted in a godly way, able to see something beautiful where other people simply could not see it. So of our 4 beautiful children, one of them had a hard time seeing the good when he was little. And it's very hard to explain to someone that a cup is half full. Explain that to a kid. Well, actually, if I drink it, it'll be empty. It's not a meaningful metaphor. So I was trying very hard to figure out what is the metaphor that a 6-year-old will understand. So I made 2 pairs of glasses out of pipe cleaners. One of them was red, and red was your sad glasses, and blue were your happy glasses. So here's the job. You put on, first, obviously, you're going to put on the sad glasses first, because that just comes natural. So you put on the sad glasses. Tell me everything negative you can see with these glasses. And this was not hard. Right? This toy was broken. This was missing. This friend wasn't here. V'chule, et cetera, you get the picture. Now, you put on the red glasses, and they're the blue glasses, and they're the happy glasses. Tell me what you see in the same space with the happy glasses. And I know you're thinking, I have a lot of adults I'm going to make those glasses for. There's going to be a run on pipe cleaners. As it happens, it's very, very hard to put on a different pair of glasses and see the same space. It takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a reorientation of the thinking. And I think there was something that Yocheved had, which created in Moshe a disposition towards hope and optimism. If your mother can think this in the gravest of circumstances, you will become a leader who can bring good. And indeed, he does. And we get Moshe's story. Moshe, in that first chapter, does several acts of social justice. Anyone remember what they were? Unbidden by God. The first was he killed an Egyptian because he saw this taskmaster was oppressing an Egyptian, a Hebrew, and he struggled, looked here and there, because he understood there were consequences of this. That once he took this risk, it was over. His life, his cosseted, comfortable life, was going to come to a quick end. So he looks here and there, but he kills the Egyptian because he cannot stand the oppression. To witness, to have a front seat at that oppression is not something any of us should have to witness. So he kills the Egyptian. Then he tries to break up a fight between two Hebrews. And he hears the foreshadow of criticism he would hear for the rest of his leadership. Mi samcha l'ish sar v'shofet aleinu. Who made you ruler and an officer over us? Who are you as a leader? Who do you think you are? You know, when my kids were little, our kids were little, they used to say, "You're not the boss over me." Anyone hear that? You're not the boss over me. I'm not sure who the boss is, but you're not the one. And so here, Moshe, who risks his life to kill an Egyptian to save a Jew, is told by the very Jews he's trying to protect, "We're not interested in you. We saw what you did. You better," right? And he runs away and he hides. He says, "Are you going to kill us the way that you killed the Egyptian?" I'm going to call this politics. I'm going to call this politics. Sometimes we cannot see or let people lead because we actually, instead of seeing what the good is that they do for us, the risk and the time and the attention that they are devoting to our embetterment, what we see is what they're not doing. Or what we see, or we misinterpret or reinterpret the evil of it. We don't assume goodwill. It's a basic principle of being people positive, is assume goodwill first. If that's the hermeneutic, if those are the glasses you wear, believe me, life looks different, leadership looks different. So Moshe, despite that, he's a fugitive now of the law. He goes to a well. Robert Alter says there are, in other cultures there are wedding bells. For us, they're wedding wells. It's a biblical type scene for a marriage, as it will be. And Moshe, despite the fact that he's a fugitive and he does not want to attract attention to himself, pushes away shepherds who are harassing shepherdesses and making them late. And of course, they come home, and the father, Yitro, says, "Why didn't you bring him home?" Now, I want to share a really fascinating observation from Martin Buber in his work on Moshe. He says, it's interesting. We don't have names. We only have honorifics of leaders on the assumption that Yitro may be an honorific. We encounter a Levite, two Levites, Levi and a Bat Levi. We encounter a Kohen, Midian, later, and we encounter Paro. He says, what's the function of this in one short chapter? Moshe saw not only one model of leadership, he saw 3 models of leadership in 3 different cultures. It's fascinating. So in order to grow Moshe into the mature leader that he would need to be, to radicalize this revolution and to inspire it, he needed to learn under the best. Now, after this long biography of Moshe's initial social justice acts, we have a very unusual statement, or I would say 2 psukim. So if you look at them with me, 3 psukim, the end of Exodus. Vayhi b'yamim harabim hahem v'yamat melech Mitzrayim v'yanchu b'nei Yisrael min avodah v'yizaku v'tal shavatam el Elohim min avodah. We had 22 verses about the early life of Moshe, And then we turn the video camera and we look at all of the people crying. And Vishma Elohim et naktam, and finally God heard their moaning and remembered the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Vayar Elohim et bnei Israel v'yada Elohim. God looked and he saw and he knew. So you'll ask a question, and it's the most obvious question in the study of Exodus. Why didn't God hear their crying in chapter 1? Why do you have to wait till the end of chapter 2? And why, after the biography of Moshe Rabbeinu, do we have God finally looking at what the Israelites were doing, how they were suffering? And that's a question that Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik asked. I was privileged to, my husband and I lived in his community, albeit after his passing, Stender with his name, and we learned a lot of his Torah by living in the community. He was a man who was the keeper of the Rabbi Soloveitchik tapes. And if he liked you, this took years to build up a relationship. If he liked you, he gave you a tape to listen to. So I was the beneficiary of a tape. It was a 4-hour shiur where he shared this thought. And it is, I could honestly say, I think it's influenced me perhaps every day of my life. So Rav Soloveitchik says that in the first chapter, the Israelites were decreed to be slaves, but none of them cried. God didn't respond because they didn't cry. They only cry now at the end of chapter 2. And when they cry, we can respond. And that's very foundational to Rabbi Soloveitchik's thought, is that redemption, he calls it, is the word. The moment you tell me you need something, I can activate myself to make sure I'm responsive. But if I don't know and I'm not a mind reader, I can't do that. Now, of course, that's not the situation we have with God. But when you think about chapter 1, and this is what Rav Soloveitchik says, when people have no savior, when there is no leader, there is no point in crying because no one will hear you. So you become numb to your own pain. And the worst thing that you can do to someone is deprive them of the expression of their own suffering, because then no one will hear it and no one will remedy it. So for Rav Soloveitchik, the mere appearance of Moshe on the scene, his mere existence, meant that life possibly could get better. There was a glimmer of hope. And the people move from silence to tears. And Rav Soloveitchik uses a very simple metaphor, or actually activity, example in everyday life. He says if you take a child to a playground, a little child on the slide or on the swings, falls down. And what does a child do first? Looks around. If someone is watching, it's a great time to have a gazunta cry. So you're going to get a lot of attention. But if you're not going to get attention, you absorb the pain, you dust yourself off, you get back on the slide again. So he says, in the development of the human being, there's a moment when you say, will anyone hear me if I cry? But if I know someone will hear me, then I express myself and someone else can respond. And so for Rav Soloveitchik, the silence turns into tears. The tears turn into prayer, za'akah. And the za'akah turns into advocacy, shalach et ami. We go from silence to tears to prayer to advocacy. And because Moshe stayed with this despite the fact that people tried to push, his own people tried to push him away and make him ineffective, he took the people from silence to tears to prayer to advocacy and then to song. Az Yashir Moshe. It's such a remarkable understanding of what great leadership is. Great leadership is the capacity to take someone from silence to song and every stage in between. And that is the legacy that Moshe leaves us with. So let's pay very careful attention to something at the bottom of page 3. V'yishma Elohim et Naktam, v'yizkor Elohim et Brito et Avram et Yitzchak ve'et Yaakov. In that moment, God acknowledged the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you go back to the text that we studied in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, in Moshe's last moments, what did God say? Zo ta'aretz asher nishmati la'Avram liYitzchak u'liYaakov. Moshe, you have done it. You were there at the beginning, and you're there at the end, and the middle was hard. The middle was hard. But you got there. And that's what you get with the long arc of service, when you give a lifetime to it. And a lifetime doesn't mean I feel really burnt out and COVID is hard, so someone else should volunteer. Someone else should make the minyan. Someone else should sign up for that responsibility. Someone else should be the rabbi. Someone else should be the rebbitzin. It's someone else's job. Because you look at Moshe, all of those many, many, many chapters in between the second chapter of Exodus and the 34th chapter in Deuteronomy, Moshe had to navigate the push and pull of what leadership is. And there's often no glory in it. And there's often burnout. And there's often what Churchill called the dog day, right? The black dog of depression that comes with these jobs. But we're at an inflection point. Are we going to truly come out of this as a revitalized, more innovative community, more caring and compassionate, because that is what is demanded of us at this moment? Or are we going to say someone else is going to do it, because I'm going to tell you right now, no one else is going to do it. You're it. You're it. I'm it. We're it. If we don't do it, then our children see that there's not a Lador Vador. We absconded. We left the job for someone else. Why should they pick up what we could not role model and do ourselves? And I want to say that it's not onerous. It's a source of joy. I want to share with you a little observation and meditation that a Lebanese-American poet, Khalil Gibran, some of you may be familiar with his work, said, and again, a strong influence on me. I slept, no, you don't have it, you keep looking though. I slept and I dreamed that life is all joy. I woke and I saw that life is all service. I served and I saw that service is joy. Service is joy. And you're here because Leonie embodied that joy. Because she understood what the long arc of service means. It means suggesting to someone, taking someone out for coffee and saying, it could be you. What do you think about this? And then calling and mentoring and discussing and advising and sitting with in the hard moments and the good moments. And we don't have Leonie. So you have to be Leonie. That's what we're called upon to do. Long-term service with joy. And our people deserve that. And we are responsible for it. Let us lead and continue the legacy that Leonie left us. And let us do so with joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. I just have to say that it was remarkably fitting, your use of the destination postcard, because for all of us that work with Leonie in community development, when she could envision what a community would look like right at the start when there were just a few people, as she could bring along a whole load of leaders to make it happen, that's what she was doing. She was using destination postcard. You also reminded us through your very moving words of the legacy Leonie has left behind, those that she's inspired, the connections she made, the network she built, the leaders she developed. But alongside her commitment to the community was a loyalty that ran much deeper. that to her family. And I have to tell you, there were so many meetings that started with the latest family news. Maybe you didn't always want that, but they started with the latest family news, photos, and we were sometimes joined by a grandchild or two, much to Leonie's delight. And so it is only right, therefore, that the evening ends with words from her husband, Howard, on behalf of her family. Ben and Ruth, we're delighted that you're here with us. And we also hope that Adam and Dassie are able to watch with the recording. And so, Howard, I hand over to you.
Chief Rabbi, Rabbonim, excuse my voice, members of the United Synagogue, President, everyone else, friends. I didn't think a year ago that Leonie's passing would result in me suddenly becoming a public speaker. My last consideration was ever to want to make a public speech, and I seem to have found myself doing this on a regular basis. What can I say? Wow. When you Google the name Leonie Lewis, you get pictures of Leonie and you get pictures of Leona Lewis, the pop star. I'm just hoping that when Leona Lewis Googles, she gets pictures of Leonie as well. 13 months have passed, and whilst Leonie is well remembered by many, her roles in many organisations in which she was involved have rightly passed to others, as you would expect. Nothing can remain the same. Even in the family unit, life has had to move on, and we were pleased to celebrate the culmination of a happy event over the weekend. PG, we will celebrate many Simchot over the next few years. On each occasion, there will be mixed feelings, knowing that she is missing. As it was on Sunday, the happy couple had to replace Leonie's prayers and thoughts with me, a rather poor substitute. Next year, when, please God, our third grandchild celebrates her bat mitzvah, she will not have the support of one of her loving grandmothers. The last 13 months have made me think from time to time of what she would have thought of all the events that have been held in her memory. No doubt there would have been some embarrassment, but after acceptance that people wanted to remember her suggestions as to how each of them should have been organised slightly differently. My other thoughts centre sadly on what messages she would have given me on the 27th of April last year had I stayed until 9:30, instead of saying 2 hours before, "Goodbye, see you tomorrow, and I'll pick up some oranges for you on the way home." What a difference 2 hours can make. Chief Rabbi, I want to thank you again for all you have said on the occasions of her Lavoya, her stone setting, and tonight. It's been very special to us as a family to have you say those words. Leonie appreciated you so much and was always very happy to work with you. And it's a true delight to have Lady Sachs present, because clearly Leonie's involvement with Johnson's, Lord Sax's office was also very special to her. I'd like to thank everyone involved with the US, including the executive and everyone that was involved this evening, particularly David and Joe, for their constant wish to ensure that this event went exactly as we, the family, would have wanted. And your attention to detail was extreme. A word of special thanks to Leonie's long-term friend, Michael Goldstein, the president of the United Synagogue, for his words at Leonie's passing and his thoughtfulness since. Since Leonie was his madricha on the Israeli tour I think in 1978, around that time. 1979? Around that time, anyway. She was always pleased to meet you and serve with you as a trustee. Leonie really did always feel the United Synagogue could be a special organisation, offering more than a shawl to its members. It was at times very satisfying to her, and other times very challenging. Our speaker today, Erica. Until I read Nikki Goldman's excellent JC obituary in which she quoted from your book, Inspired Jewish Leadership, I was not familiar with you. But when I read about the dance circle, I realised that without ever knowing Leonie, you had captured her spirit down to a T. If ever anyone was looking to bring people into the circle in any of her many activities, it was Leonie. She was a master of the skill, and I thank you for your presentation tonight, which simply outlined even more so the message that Leonie was trying to get across. It was a delight to further discover that you are part of the alumni of Frisch School, New Jersey, which is attended by my two eldest grandchildren, who will very much appreciate hearing you later. Thank you for making this a very special evening and coming from New Jersey to be with us. I'll be there myself next week. Of course, I have many special family memories of Leonie, but of her communal ones, centering on those outside of the mainstream Jewish life, I recall that Leonie, on working first with the Jewish deaf and being told to speak at her deaf clients so they could read her words, immediately went out to learn not one but two versions of sign language so she could communicate more directly with them. In 2013, representing people of all faiths and of none, to speak out alongside Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, against religious extremism which had led to the murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby. In 2015, to lead a group of mixed religious persons to Srebrenica to mark the 20th anniversary of the massacre of fathers and sons, and to make such an impression that the chairperson of the mothers group, on attending a ceremony in London, walked past other dignitaries to hug her in recognition of what she meant to them. During the COVID pandemic, to be part of a group that made the government recognise that some so-called hard-to-reach groups were not hard to reach, but needed special setups to ensure that they undertook vaccinations. Amongst them, she started with the Haredi, with her contacts, the Haredi groups that received bad publicity for not wanting, allegedly, vaccinations. And when she realised that actually people did want vaccinations, she extended to the traveller community, the Black African community, and others. And many more incidents and stories that we all know about Leonie. But yet, with all that, she still stood outside local supermarkets with a collecting box for our local charity, Harrow Menkap, on a regular basis, becoming known as the Tin Lady and being irreplaceable. We quoted at her shiva that a young Muslim gentleman wrote to us from Iran, saying that Leonie had told him to live his dream, and he was studying to be an imam. Quite a contrast to the many young rabbis who also indicated Leonie was part of why they were where they were. That was my wife Leonie, and I wanted to thank everyone who was here tonight for coming to also remember her. And without wishing to in any way suggest otherwise, it was a pleasure that Joe, you took the position of Chief Executive, because I can assure you, if Leonie had been around last year, she would have been thoroughly supporting you in succession to a previous excellent Chief Executive, Stephen Wilson. So thank you for coming today and remembering with the Lewis family and the Merkel family, I should also say, Leonie, a very special person. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Howard, for your very moving words. What now? Our mission from here is to continue to meet the challenges that Leonie set for us, to think more ambitiously, more creatively, to be bold. And just before we close, it's with this in mind, this is why the United Synagogue and the Office of the Chief Rabbi are soon to be launching, in partnerships with other organisations in the UK and Israel, an advanced Torah program for women with the aim of building a cadre of female leaders and teachers for our communities. And we will, of course, have Leonie in mind when we formally launch the program. So for now, it leaves me to thank again our speakers, the Chief Rabbi, Dr. Erica Brown and Howard Lewis, for your meaningful and motivating words. I would also like to thank colleagues here at Mill Hill Synagogue, as well as Gila Howard and the Living and Learning team, who helped to put the evening together. And most of all, to thank all of you for coming to remember our friend Leonie. Thank you and good night.